Welcome to Slate School and our panel discussion entitled, "We Are All Teachers and Learners, Humility and Respect in Innovation and Leadership." Slate School is committed to excellence in education, and we are delighted to present the Education Idea Lab, which is a new, unique virtual series that is free and open to the public. This thought-leading event convenes leaders, change makers, and participants from all sectors of education and innovation. Thank you for joining us. We're thrilled to have all of you here with us today. My name is Julie Mountcastle, and I'm head of school at Slate School. So I'll briefly introduce you to Slate School, review the panel logistics, and then we'll hear from our 4 expert panelists. Slate School is an independent 501c3 nonprofit elementary school where education is focused on cultivating creativity, fostering ingenuity, and inspiring a deep passion for lifelong learning. At Slate School, we have formed a community that is constantly striving to improve practice, to create meaningful educational experience for learners of all ages, and to change the landscape of education. Slate School convenes experts for important, authentic conversations about education. And these online dialogues, like today's, are free and open to the public. We're so delighted to have all of you with us today. And I think we again have learners joining us from all 6 continents. So I'll basically describe the logistics of the webinar. We have 4 amazing panelists, and they have a wealth of expertise to share with you during this next hour. Each of our panelists today will give a 2-minute or so introduction about themselves, their current role, and their key guidance and advice about our topic, humility and respect in innovation and leadership. We'll then proceed with the panel discussion, and we would invite you to submit additional questions as comments on Facebook, and we will select some of those, if possible, to ask the panelists today. We'll proceed with having our panelists introduce themselves in alphabetical order. So I'm delighted to introduce you to our first panelist, Jennifer Gerarda Brown. Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. My name is Jennifer Brown, and currently I'm the Interim Executive Vice President and Provost at Quinnipiac University in Hamden, Connecticut. Prior to taking this interim role, I was the Dean of the Law School at Quinnipiac. And in my time at Quinnipiac, which has spanned a couple of decades, in addition to teaching law, I have directed a center on dispute resolution, and I've written quite a bit about negotiation, mediation, professional responsibility for lawyers, and LGBTQ legal rights. So those have been my areas of emphasis.
Amazing. Wonderful. Thank you. Welcome. Next, I'll introduce you to Paul Ellingstad. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Julie. Thanks, and delighted to be here today for the conversation. In my current role, I'm the managing partner for PTI Advisors. We're a small boutique management consultancy focused on leadership, change, and innovation. I've spent the better part of my career in the technology sector with Gateway Compact and HP, and am one of those people that made the leap from business as usual and doing philanthropy and social impact on my spare time to the convergence of business and society. So I've been involved in social innovation for about the last 10 years or so as well. Thanks.
Great. And now Charles MacCormack. Good morning, Charlie. How are you?
Hello. I'm Charlie MacCormack. I'm President Emeritus of Save the Children and President Emeritus of the School for International Training. I'm currently Distinguished Visiting Professor at Fairfield University and Senior Fellow for the National Association of U.S. International NGOs.
Beautiful. Great. And last but not least, Mark Roithmayr. Morning, Mark.
Good morning, Julie. And first of all, thank you to you, the Slate School, Jennifer, Unite for Sight for bringing us all together today. And talk about humility, listening to kind of the murderer's row of leadership that was before me. It's a little hard to keep pace there. Let me say that. 36 years, nonprofit healthcare agencies. I am currently the CEO of the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation. That is a venture philanthropy started by the Lauder family, as in Estee Lauder. I spend a lot of time with big donors like Gates and Bezos. But I started my career 37 years ago at the March of Dimes, raising funds a dime at a time. And again, I just want to thank Julie, you for pulling this together today. We don't often talk enough about leadership and roles like humility as just a total nonprofit group, and it's an honor to be part of this today.
Well, thank you. We're so glad you're here. So I guess I just want to kind of get this out of the way, and I want to hear sort of whatever any of the panelists think about this topic, because I think I think often people confuse humility with a lack of self-confidence. And I think it goes both ways. I think that's on the receiving end. You meet someone who is humble, and perhaps you might think that that's a lack of self-confidence. Or as a human, you might be so focused on being humble that you might develop a lack of self-confidence, or you might be projecting that because you don't want to have ownership somehow of your own power. And I'm just curious about, if you could each talk a little bit to clarify the difference for people that you feel yourself about the difference between humility and lack of confidence. So Jennifer, would you start?
Sure. Yeah, I think actually it's just the reverse of this misconception. It's that true humility actually requires strength, and often flows from strength and flows from confidence. And when we were, as I was thinking about this panel, I was reminded of actually one of my favorite phrases from Scripture, which comes from 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 8, where he's writing about community and dispute resolution, and he encourages the friends that he's writing to cultivate, quote, a tender heart and a humble mind. And that couplet's always sort of stuck with me, because I think Peter writes this because he knows it actually requires some intention to keep your heart tender and your mind humble. And you might have to kind of commit yourself to it and really be intentional about it, to be open and to listen to others, and to know what you don't know, and to receive what others have to teach you. And I think that when you have that commitment and that intention, that gives you confidence. Actually, it gives you strength to be receptive to what others have to offer you. And when you have that, and this is the last thing I'll say, being able to receive what others can contribute to your thinking or your decision making, that doesn't destabilize you. It doesn't knock you off your feet. It actually is something that you absorb into the intention and the commitment that you already have. So, yeah, humility is not about a lack of self-confidence. It actually flows from strength, in my view.
Wow. Who's got something to add to that?
Everybody on this panel, I'm confident of that.
Really, I'll make a couple of comments, if I may.
Great, Charlie.
One is, what does humility look like when we see it? That's not an easy term to define, in my opinion. And perhaps it has some generic qualities, and then it has situation-specific qualities. So what does humility look like in our household and with our family? And what does humility look like in our neighborhood? And what does humility look like in our organization, and so on? And again, there may be some cross-cutting qualities, but there are also some customized qualities, I think, to the actual form it takes. So generically, I think it has a lot to do with putting others and their hopes and needs ahead of our own. and placing those hopes and needs in a higher framework. Holding people accountable for when they are performing improperly. So it's all of that. But in this discussion, I at least am going to talk about humility in an organizational setting. And that I think is somewhat different. It certainly does have to do with this question of vision and mission and self-confidence. When you've got lots of people whose commitments and lives, fortunes, and sacred honor depends on organizational leadership, then people definitely want their leader to have vision, put the mission ahead of self, but be confident in their decision making. So we'll get more into that, but I wanted to get all that out there.
Yeah, good points. Good points. Mark or Paul?
Yeah, Julie, I'll just add something there that struck a nerve that Charlie said about applying this in the organization. I think particularly in the private sector, but in government and civil sector as well, there's this sense of self-confidence is about projecting strength. It's about winning. It's achieving. It's progress, and I think that becomes one of the challenges that humility is sort of construed as you're making concessions. It's the weakness. So I think, from both respects, it's maybe a misunderstanding and a misapplication of humility as well as self-confidence as strength versus weakness. We see that changing now. There's, certainly a lot of, talk about collaboration, even cross-sector collaboration, where you can get to the proverbial win-win. And I think that's one of the important aspects of humility as well, is that, compromise is not weakness. Compromise is a way of making progress and achieving something, with good outcomes for all involved. So moving away from this sense of whether it's personal or organizationally that I win and therefore you lose, to we can actually find a solution where we all win together.
Well said. Well said. Julie, this is one I struggled with in my career, and I have very kind of clear memories of this. Somewhere in the late 20s and early 30s, I started getting promoted through stuff, and you start thinking, everything, and if you don't know everything, you need to know everything, and you can't let anybody else know that you don't know everything, and that whole fake it till you make it. And I'll tell you, I'm really anti that now. And as I said, I had people talking to me, particularly in my 30s, about this, and I couldn't just kind of deflect it off of me. But I know exactly in my career when I really was able to own it and how great that felt. I was the first president ever of an organization called Autism Speaks, and we did 3 mergers in 20 months. And started in a place where I was the 3rd employee ever. And by the time I left, there were 200 employees. But back at that beginning time, I'd never done mergers before. And I had a board of directors who had a lot of big corporate people who had done mergers. And I was going to them all the time, seeking their advice. And I remember I had an executive assistant at the time. And she came in one day and she said to me, I really need to apologize for the way I've been thinking about you. And I kind of looked at her and I said, okay, Tanya, where is this going? And she said to me, well, and she had come from Wall Street. And she goes, I see us going through all these mergers. And I had said to my husband when I first started working for you, he is the weakest boss I ever had. He keeps calling all these other people for advice. And she said to me, I was used to working on Wall Street. I would see behind closed doors executives, they had no idea what they were doing, but when the door opened, they were darn sure, and they barked about it and they said about it, and it often led the companies into problems. But you were always seeking everybody's advice. And she goes, and now I see how successful these projects have gone and these mergers. And I'll tell you, in the middle of it, and this is where it really clarified for me, because I was struggling with it. I knew I didn't know everything. I knew I needed to know a lot. Right? And where was I going to get that from? And it wasn't coming from me, and I needed to be able to listen. And across the table from me in one of these negotiations for a merger literally was a board member for another organization who worked for Goldman Sachs, and his job was mergers and acquisitions. So I was David to his Goliath, right? But we really worked in partnership and collaboration because we had the same end mind we wanted to. And at some point in it, I said to him, you know, I find that humility can be a terrific business virtue. And I kind of said it like half embarrassed to see what his response was going to be. And he looked at me and he said, you just found gold. He goes, in his job at Goldman Sachs, he finds humility keeps you always thinking ahead, always asking the next question, never being settled on where you are. And he said, you know, in nonprofit, it must be a much bigger thing because, you know, he would say, all you folks in nonprofit, you're just trying to save the world. You know, me, I'm just trying to make money, you know, so, but that was the day. I was about 42 years old. I was like, I got it. Now I've got the humility piece.
Wow, that's a great story. That's a great story. There's so many things that you all brought up that I want to ask about. I actually, this morning I had a conversation with one of the families at my school. We were talking about collaboration and how challenging it is for kids who are usually in a school setting where they are collaborating all the time to actually be able to collaborate. I think collaboration is much easier in person because I think the tendency in a Zoom call is to want to hear, okay, what are we doing? And now everybody's active instead of this real buy-in to what the actual purpose is of it. And we were talking about how challenging it is for kids. And I'm curious, in this time of remote learning and this time of remote collaboration, if any of you are experiencing that kind of challenge, that collaboration that's not actually in the room is harder here. Any thoughts on that? We could go on to something else.
No, can I tell you, I'm not going to look to yammer on here, but lots of thoughts. I mean, the whole world, or my whole world in my company is all Zoom and, Microsoft Office Teams. And
Yep.
you do get some interaction with this, but you don't get the full, right? And again, I'm going to come back to humility. I have turned to, there is somebody 3 steps below me on the corporate ladder inside my company that she's running a task force on how do we all work together on this. And she just, she has the mind for it, and she's finding stories about how Zoom works and how it doesn't work, and real-time learning in this, and how she formed a couple of other people with her in the office who, they came to me a week or 2 ago and said, everybody needs a down Friday. This has just become too much. I mean, things I would have never, ever, ever thought of. But I know, again, I'm in a position of leadership, but I can't think my day-to-day is truly what the day of everybody in the organization is. So how in this new world, the new normal, whatever that is, how do we stay connected to that? And the answers are always out there. If I think the answers are in my head, the company's sunk. And I say that with great humility and pride.
Great. It makes me think. So, Paul, I know that you have very strong ideas about cultural humility and what you do in your work. And you probably all have this, but I just happen to know Paul a little bit better in this way. And I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the connection between cultural humility and personal humility, and how that kind of plays out in your work.
Yeah. It's interesting in these challenging times. I think that's the cliche now, that on one hand, we have a global pandemic, so we're all in this together. But we were also going as a society, perhaps towards more nationalism and populism. So this constant struggle or challenge between globalization and truly being in a globalized economy, a globalized society, but yet also the very regional or the very local life that we lead, whether it's work or personal. Cultural humility, it has been so easy to just hop on a plane from Ireland or California or New York to any place in the world and drop in. And I think one of the challenges that we've seen is that historically, development, whether it's innovation, technology, even pop culture and fashion, has been sort of linear. It might start in New York or in Paris for fashion and then permeate throughout the world. And the reality now is that, we have such a globalized society that trends that pop up in Nairobi or in Kampala or in Sydney, might start to direct, trends in Silicon Valley, for example. So I think, that's, one of the challenges is that we're going through this change with globalization where before it was, I think maybe clearer where, a trend or, innovation or, something started and then, the rest of the world was following. And now I think we have to be even more conscientious of the differences given how globalized, how much we have in common, but yet, what are still the unique differences, lifestyles, challenges that we have in a physical location. And again, even now that, we find ourselves, in the working world all on Zoom, and it's easy to say, okay, we're all in this together. I look back 8 weeks ago and work that I've been doing for the last couple of years around remote working and advocating for that. I was shocked to see how many people and how many organizations were still very averse to remote working. Yeah, the occasional, video conference. But here we are all thrown into the same environment, but yet I'm on calls where here I am in a home office on my own. I have colleagues that because their kids are now home from school, and this isn't sort of a standard situation, but, are doing work calls, with their kids on their lap. So even that just conscientiousness of even though here we are on a platform and it looks like we all have the same situation, we all have different issues that we're dealing with on a daily basis in our working lives and in our personal lives. So I think it really comes down to cultural humility is so tied to the personal humility as well, that we have very complex, very busy lives. We're working in a very complex world where we're connected literally all over the world, but yet we have, a very human condition, very personal circumstances ourselves and everyone else we're dealing with does too. So this idea even of like what had been, work-life blend, it's now, work-life balance, now it's work-life blend. And I think being really conscientious that so much of this is going on, if we can be conscientious, then we can be respectful of others as well.
Paul, can I ask you a question on
Yep.
this topic?
Yeah.
It's about the different cultural manifestations of humility. So in the US, I think humility is seen significantly as including informality and egalitarianism. So often we'll be called by our first name, we won't wear a tie, whatever it may be, that signals we're one of you. But in Ethiopia, humility in leadership is seen as formality. And wearing a suit and tie, having a doctorate, and so on and so forth, and still interacting with people, but not being informal. In Japan, humility is seen as properly understanding and fulfilling your role in the whole system of relationships, and on and on and on. So you emphasize the kind of the cross-cutting element of humility, but how do you see this variable that different cultures expect it to look differently? Or even do you agree that that's the case?
Yeah.
That's a really good question. I would try not to hog the time here. Let me use one particular example. A lot of work that I do with Latin American clients, there is a degree of interest and reverence and importance of the family that, again, in say maybe in the US, spending what might be considered too much time talking about your family is seen as, oh, that's the small talk. Okay, let's get through that and move on. But in reality, with many cultures, focus on the family. It's not just, okay, it's the small talk and now we're on to business. Or say, again, in the US, I find that it's like jump right into business. Again, that split between, work life and personal life. But if you're not talking about your family, you're being rude. So, there are a lot of different aspects of this, some, very overt, more that are a little bit more subtle, but I think it starts with the conscientiousness and then setting the norms, with the individuals in whatever culture, whatever country that you're dealing with, and coming to sort of a respect of each other's cultures and coming to some normalization of how you're going to be operating, but being conscientious, first of all, that you're coming from two different mindsets or two different perspectives in the first place.
Yes, so probably asking,
Yeah.
I have respect for you, but I'm not sure I'll know how to show that appropriately with you. Can you share with me what respect looks like in your culture? It's a big question, but it probably solves problems. Jennifer, I'm wondering, as you, I know you've taught in a lot of places, and I think in your current role, there's probably still a fair amount of collaboration with other institutions. And I'm curious. So we've heard, sort of the nonprofit side of this kind of collaboration. But what is it like, in your position between institutions to collaborate? And how does humility sort of manifest itself in those interactions?
Yeah, so this, I think, kind of jumps off of Paul's point about the importance of sort of different situations, different perspectives. Because I think in higher ed, I'm sure it's very similar to other industries or areas of endeavor, that change and progress comes from seeing room for improvement, being willing to see the areas where there's room for improvement, so being willing to experiment and then actually seeking feedback about how the experiment went. And then, in a really visible way, communicating, I'm making a change because of the feedback I got from you, that, sort of builds trust in the people who are a part of that experiment. So, in my time at Quinnipiac, I've had the opportunity to work on projects with Yale. I've had opportunities to work with the University of Connecticut. Within Quinnipiac, I've collaborated with other schools, or I've convened groups where we're coming together. And, I think it is those different perspectives. And then there's another piece about the humility that one can bring to those collaborations that really does help to make progress. And that is, I think it's hard to make lasting change without resources and without an audience. And sometimes it's collaboration with other organizations, other parts of our organization that give us access to resources we might otherwise lack, whether it's people or ideas or money. And then also bring a new audience to something that we're doing. Because I had found, for example, in the work I was doing on dispute resolution, we have a lot of great ideas within Quinnipiac, but it's when I started working with Yale and got to tap into their audiences, when I brought to Yale an audience of mediators, judges, lawyers who were interested in this work, who might have thought, forgive me, anyone from Yale who's watching this, nothing personal, but some of those people might have thought, oh, Yale's just a little too theoretical. They're not going to be interested in what I do. But when we brought these groups together, we created a new kind of an audience, a blend of an audience that could move it forward. So, I think it's this collaboration across institutions is about the different perspectives that Paul was talking about, and it's about consolidating and kind of complementing each other too. Not like, oh, you're looking great today, right? But more, you've got a strength in an area I lack. I have a strength in an area that you could use some help in. So it's pretty basic, I guess, but I think it can often move things forward.
Yeah, a little bit of resisting the echo chamber, I think.
Mhm.
Absolutely, right.
Resisting. It does feel good to have people agree with you, but you're not learning a lot. The learning journey's not really happening if everybody just agrees. So please stop nodding.
Can't help it.
Thank you.
It happens.
So, Mark, I love the story you told about your early career. I thought that was so apt and really lovely. And when I think about, people that I've learned a lot from, a few people come to mind, a few. And maybe I should say, right, very clearly that I've learned, I think, the most from children. But I'm wondering if you had a role model, or if there was somebody that, you thought to yourself, gee, if I could do it like that, I would feel really good about that.
Yeah, and again, you'd rather be lucky than good. Early in my career, I was in my late 20s, and I had been promoted into a position at the March of Dimes to be kind of what now we would call C-suite, but then it was called VPs of a new administration. And there was a CEO who was retiring from the organization. And the new CEO who brought me in said, okay, all the new VPs, you have to spend at least one 45-minute session with Charlie. Charlie was the outgoing CEO. And I remember I got halfway through the 45-minute session with Charlie, and I thought, boy, if this guy will have me, I'm going to meet with him for the rest of his life, because he had, I realized there isn't anything I can do in my career that this gentleman hasn't been through. And I will tell you, Charlie passed about 3 years ago, but I carry him with me every day. For 20 years, I had breakfasts with him, which were just phenomenal. And these breakfasts, I used to say, Charlie, I need help with, and I go, blah, 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 blah. I take a breath, and he said, are you done yet? No, blah, blah, blah. And I would go on, and finally, somewhere around an hour, he said, Mark, okay, you need to be done now. And he'd give me some advice, and I would hear the advice, and I'd be like, why am I even doing this? Charlie did he even listen to me? And then in the next week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, when I went back to work, his voice was in my head and showing me a road I hadn't even seen. He was of the World War II generation, the greatest of the greatest. He, after World War II, came back, wanted to be attached to a movement, so he became attached with the March of Dimes. He organized their polio field trials. He took them from polio to birth defects. And 3 big things that I learned from Charlie: listen, experience, and stewardship. The listening. He would say to me, hey, Mark, once words are out of your mouth, you can never get them back. So hold on to them. They'll give you power. But if you're talking all the time, you're not going to be able to do it. And that forced me to listen. And every one of our panelists has talked about this, whether it's personal humility, cultural humility, it's listening to others, learning. Experience, and boy, did he take me through the paces on experience. He kind of broke it down into 3 ways. He said, first of all, if you don't have experience, it's okay. You can't be blamed for it. So don't think you know everything. If you don't have experience, and go into it and learn from the experience, but don't feel shy. Don't feel smaller than you are. Don't fake it to make it, right? But see who we can learn from about that experience, go into the experience. Then he taught me, once you have the experience, and if you keep making the same mistakes, now you got a problem, right? So, okay. And then he taught me, can't be blamed for experience. Once you have the experience, use it well. The last 2 pieces of this, which he taught me right at the end, then you have wisdom, and you have a responsibility to pass that wisdom on. And you'll start seeing the game slows down for you. You can see things before other people see them, but don't keep that. Pass it on and bring it back. The last part was the concept of stewardship. he didn't like the word leader. He liked the word steward. I think when we see leader, I think it's a tendency for people, it certainly was a tendency for me to become a leader, you know, but being a steward, boy, that has responsibility and humility and collaboration and all of that built into it. And with stewardship comes responsibility. And with stewardship comes fidelity. And what do I mean? Well, what did he mean by that? That when we are true humble leaders, when we are servant leaders, whatever that cause is, if it's a school, if it's, you know, science and research, if it's international relief, we have a fidelity to do that to the best of our ability. And if we get to the point we don't think we can do that anymore, or something else looks tempting for us, we have to stand up and be able to say, this has been great, I've done it, but I need to move on now, right? Because, so those things, listening, experience, and fidelity, and stewardship, it's my mentor, Charlie, and there isn't literally a week that goes by that I don't have his lessons playing through me. And like today, giving them to others, that's the greatest gift he gave to me, was to be able to ultimately give that away also. So.
You're lucky. That's a beautiful relationship you had, and I'm sure it was meaningful for him too, because he was able to share that. Yeah. I'm gonna go directly to our Charlie, and and I'm just gonna ask you. So I think Mark got us a long way down the road of a recipe of what humility looks like in leadership. And I'm wondering if there are any ingredients that you'd add, because I you know, what are you thinking on that?
Well, Mark definitely suggested this, but I find it in organizational life very closely aligned with vision and commitment to vision and mission. And considering that much more important than one's own ego or opportunity, and realizing that that can only be done by a team that feels respected and empowered, and given the spotlight in a way, and put first. So in a way, that's my definition of organizational humility, is that you are there to achieve the mission of the organization, which is much, it's forever, it's more important than your needs and hopes. And you're also there to support the team in being able to play their role better. So to me, that's kind of more important than a demeanor, which can vary. But if people see that you're doing everything you're doing with the mission in mind and the impact of the mission in mind, and for them, they will certainly feel that you're not full of ego and you're not in it to seize the podium.
Yes, it's interesting. I think in my experience, when I've gotten the most ahead of myself, I have been humbled.
That.
And
Slightly different point, if I may.
Yes.
Julia. That is, certainly in my day at least, we were socialized, particularly young men, to see leadership as winning, and kind of a zero-sum phenomenon. And the education system was about testing and doing better, and getting in the advanced track, and then even then it was seen as doing better than the people in the advanced track, and then it was seen as being successful in sports and and captaining a team of one kind or another and having a winning record. And then you went into the military, and that was about winning and overcoming the enemy and so on and so forth. And then getting into a great graduate school and doing well in that graduate school, having extracurricular activities. So you got rewarded every inch of the way until I was 25 for doing better than others. And kind of being, bigger, stronger, tougher. And so the only point I'm making is certainly at that time, the society essentially thought of success and leadership as a zero-sum game in which you did better than other people. So that's why I think what you're doing at the Slate School is so great, because obviously you're demonstrating collective learning and team learning, and I think that's great. But I just want to raise this issue of the contradiction between how lots of society socialize, particularly the young men, and then what you need to learn in order to be a good leader of people and teams.
Yes, yes. It's interesting to me. I think we're all kind of connecting with some ideas of mistakes that have been made that have shaped us, and I think I hear that, and it's interesting what you were saying, Charlie, because I think all of our parents wanted us to do better than they did, and they only had their own scale for that, and I think we continue on that, as parents ourselves. For those of us who are parents, if you feel like, you want everybody you want your children to do better than you, don't, benefit from the mistakes I've made. Don't make that mistake. But I think it's the mistakes, actually. If we rob our kids of making mistakes, then I think that's our biggest mistake, because that's where the learning is happening. And I've learned a lot of lessons through doing things the wrong way, just really, messing things up. And the lessons were unexpected. And I'm wondering, maybe Jennifer, you in particular, if you've had similar experiences to that, if you've had some unexpected lessons, and how you think maybe that might have improved the way you lead.
I'm sure I have, and I'm sure that many of the mistakes I've made, even as I sit here right now, I don't know that I made them, and that's my loss. That maybe I haven't been able to hear from as many people about, sort of unintended consequences of decisions that I've made or helped to make that really would be valuable for me to have that information. But can I just turn your question a little bit differently, because it kind of picks up on what Charlie was saying. It's a little bit of a gendered thing, possibly too. And I don't know whether the way I've worked in this area and done things the wrong way or made mistakes is I've partly been able to do it because I'm a woman rather than a man. I want to sort of lead with that. But I think that a lot of people kind of buy into this idea of leaders or even stewards as strong and invulnerable, and that if we show doubt, if we show uncertainty, or that's weakness, and that is doing things the wrong way, that is a mistake, that will lead our group down the wrong path. And I think the thing that I've learned about my own leadership style and the way I've worked with people, and maybe it's the most important thing I've learned, is that I kind of have to be real about it. And there's a lot of talk about authenticity these days, and I'm sure that means different things to different people. But for me, it has actually been about showing emotion and acknowledging my own uncertainty about what's going on. I think right now, anybody who says, I know what's going to happen, even 2 weeks from now or a month from now, is not in touch with reality, right? We are in a deep state of uncertainty, and being able to acknowledge that, I feel, is part of being real. You know, because sometimes when you're in a situation that really is terrible, and you really do feel sad, and you do feel uncertain, I'll just speak for myself. If I deny that, then I'm kind of separating myself from the people in my community that I want to work with and you know, move forward with them. So that has led me in some times when you know, resources have been incredibly strained, where we've had to let go of some activities and even lose some community members who we cared about deeply because we just didn't have the money to keep them in the fold, where we had to turn away from maybe some activities we'd been involved in and move to something else. Those are really, really hard transitions. And what I learned was that it was okay to acknowledge how hard they are, and, you know, to be in a faculty meeting, and not in some phony, like, oh, I feel your pain kind of way, but just sort of, I mean, to be in touch with how that feels, and to even, you know, my voice would catch, or, you know, a little tear starts to fall, and I'm like, oh no, that's a sign of weakness. Actually, no, it's, I think, as long as you don't become a blubbering, ineffective mess over there in the corner while other people have to move on and get things done, I feel that being honest about the emotional aspects of what you're going through, people might say that's a mistake. People might say that's doing it the wrong way. And I actually believe that it is part of being the real whole person in these situations.
Boy, that was so much better than what I asked. Yeah, I think you're onto something there, Jennifer. You're onto something. I guess there's a balance, I guess, that we're seeking, a balance. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, maybe Paul, you could speak a little bit to that balance of being able to share about yourself, share who you are, so that, you know, you're not hiding your humanity, but also then being able to sort of say, yes, this is hard, but this is what we're going to do, because sometimes you have to do that too. So what do you think?
What strikes a chord there, Julie, is that you know, again, coming out of the technology sector, I look at over the last 20 or even 30 years, how technology has been, it's become so pervasive in everything that we do, work life as well as personal life. And it's gotten to a point where, you know, I remember back, you know, maybe about 10 years ago, it was like, oh, you want to do X, Y, or Z. Oh, there's an app for that. And it was just like, yeah, everything I want to do, you know, from, you know, ordering cinema tickets to whatever, my banking, you know, you do it on an app. And it just, we got into this sort of style of convenience that we sort of stopped thinking. And it's just, yeah, the technology is doing it for us. And, you know, even over the course of the last year or so, there's been this sort of the fear about AI and automation and, you know, where are we going, that the technology is taking over, you know, what is the future of work? Is it human, or is it the robots taking over? And, you know, I think particularly right now, we're at this really critical point where systems are breaking down, natural systems, economic systems, social systems, that we have to stop and say, is part of what we have done as human nature of trying to slot things into boxes and categorize things, and they're either black or white or red or green. This is back to, it's not even the case of a balance or you know, this categorization, but being more comfortable with the blend, being more comfortable with ambiguity and uncertainty and the volatility, because, you know, we are living in systems, but we don't really comprehend, and we don't have the comfort in dealing with the complexity of systems, particularly ones that we don't understand, but that we have the overconfidence that we actually do understand that we can master nature, we can master the economy, we can, master everything around us, when in fact, we've just scratched the surface of what we actually know, much less what we can control. And so, yeah, I think, for me, some of the bright spots here, the fact that, there's been sort of this resurgence or emergence of EQ, emotional intelligence. So again, moving from, it's not just IQ, it's not just the pure intelligence, but it's, it's that conscientiousness of self and how we relate, to our environment and to those around us as well. What I think started out with a little bit of an eye roll around mindfulness and, some of, again, these quote unquote softer elements of management, particularly now, even in the last 6 weeks, people are talking fundamentally differently about well-being and mental resilience than we were before people were confined to their homes. So these, for me, are all bright spots that what, again, might have been seen as weakness or, oh, those are things that we do when, when the business is running well, when society is fine, when we have extra time, are now really regarded as really critical issues that we probably take for granted and overlook far too often. So I think that, again, maybe it's a little bit of, get off the hamster wheel and take a pause and recognize that, we do need breaks. We need to recharge and sort of reflect on what's going on around us and even what's going on inside us, instead of just being in this constant, on this constant treadmill of getting ahead, getting further, more progress. That comes at a cost as well if we can't recharge.
Yeah. I think one of the motivators for having these conferences was the idea that, we're open now as humans, as business, as countries, as towns, as whatever system you're in. It's a little bit broken open right now, and the idea was just maybe we could have these conversations so that we could build back better, while we have this opportunity, while things are paused, while things are different, that we could try to find the opportunity in that to come back strong. But I think one of the important things that I guess as we go forward that I'm not sure about and is how we communicate with each other about what we're doing, about how we sort of share this idea, this mission. How do we go forward from here, and how do we humbly communicate with others if we've been in our little squares thinking about what we think is going to be the right way to return. My Build Back Better might be different than my colleagues' Build Back Better. I actually hope it is different, because I do try to surround myself with people who don't agree with me, who don't think like me, or who have some skill that I don't have, or some talent. And there are so many that I don't have. So it's easy to find people to work with. But how do we communicate that humbly? How do we say, this is really, I've been thinking about this a lot, and this is really what I think we should do. How do we communicate that, and how do we have this next phase of this experience in a way that is really meaningful and really positive for everybody? And that I'm going to ask you, Mark, to start on that.
Oh, geez.
So you're on.
Well, so there's a lot here, right? And I want to go back to some things actually everybody said, but I'm going to start with Jennifer and relate to Paul and Charlie also. First of all, just as a kind of broad overview, they say we learn, and this is from Harvard Business Review, we learn leadership in 3 distinct ways: having a mentor, attending workshops like this, and by the way, having a mentor and attending workshops like this, if you would add the 2 of those together, it comes to about 30%. The other 70%, and this is studied, is jumping in the deep end, right? So it's this, okay, here you go, push. And this is where I want to come back to Jennifer, because she brought up the gender piece, and I think it's a very important piece. And you can call me biased, but I've read a lot about this. I've seen things about this. I really believe women are just better than men at this. And there's reasons why, and we don't have the time today for me to go into that. I remember once there was a professor at Wharton at University of Pennsylvania. To demonstrate this, they did a study they gave men and women each a whole bunch of money to use in a make-believe stock market, and how did they go about it? And the guys just took big risky bets, and they got hurt by those bets, and they learned from them, and then they made their bets better. And over time, they got there. The women took the same amount of fake money in the market, and they went into it slowly, and they got advice from a lot of other people, and they built it up from humbly learning, listening, all of these things. I just believe. So, sorry, fellas, on this, but I just think women are better than men. And turned out their portfolios make-believe portfolios ended up being stronger over a longer period of time. Started slower, but ended up being stronger. So I think women are just better at this. I also want to go to the EQ and the mindfulness that Paul spoke about. And in listening to this very carefully, I also heard Charlie talk about meeting a higher framework. And it was also said by Jennifer up top. She quoted scripture. And I really mean this. The more I've been at the leadership, the stewardship, the thing that gets you through, gets me through, or it's needed. I see this, I heard it today. There is a higher calling and a purpose. And if we just limit that to what we know, who we know, I think you need that mindfulness, that spirituality, whatever you want to call it, to really kind of further elevate oneself. The last thing I'm just going to say about this, and I know I've talked with some of you about this before. How do you get that feedback that tells you, because which way you need to be going? How do you get that honest feedback? And I'm a big proponent of what I call a personal board of advisors. And it's fluid, and no two need to be the same and at different points in your career. But these are people, they care less about the institutions or departments we're leading, but they care about you. And they care about you enough to be honest, enough for you to be vulnerable with them, enough for you to have a place where you actually can be humble. And I say this all the time, and some of you might have seen her behind me at least once during this Zoom we've been doing. The chair of the board for me, and I suggest to other people, whoever your significant other is, and the chair of my board is my wife. And she is my biggest fan because she is my biggest critic. And I don't mean that, but she's, it's a bickering kind of thing. No, she'll hold up a mirror to me and say, I've been hearing you say this. But I will also tell you, I remember once I went through a very difficult thing in my career. One of these things that I didn't do anything wrong, but all of a sudden you're a leader, it's coming at you, and it's not fair, and it's all this. I remember at the time I said, I need a personal board of advisors, and that personal board of advisors had my wife, a priest, a therapist, a lawyer, an accountant, an outside HR person, and they were all different people. That wasn't the same person. But there are people I needed to turn to outside my immediate work environment to get those other voices going, but also voices that would be honest with me, that knew me and only cared the most about me, whether I wanted to hear it or not. And I'll tell you, I don't know how anybody does it without a personal board of advisors, and whether it's a project or it's a department or it's a whole organization, that's there for the taking anytime anybody wants it.
Thanks, Mark. So I can hardly believe that it's 11:59 and we're supposed to be ending here. We've heard so many really just wonderful thoughts about the tender heart and the humble mind, about collaboration, about what humility looks like, putting others' hopes and needs ahead of our own. Just so many incredible ideas, and I'm so thankful to all of you, actually, because I learned a lot today, and I really appreciate that, because I know the title of our panel was Teachers and Learners. And I was definitely a learner today. And I'm so grateful to all of you. And I'm grateful to everyone who came and listened today. I think there was a generous sharing of wisdom for sure. And I just thank all of you again. And I hope that perhaps this panel can be reconvened in a period of time here so that we can talk about what we've seen now since. I think I won't grow tired of your observations. So thank you again. And I'll close our meeting today just like I close all of the meetings here at Slate School with our students. I'll just say thank you for coming and positive rice to you all. Positive rice.